Hello and welcome. I see folks joining there. Thanks for joining LitheSpeed today. You are in the right place to explore Jira reports and dashboards with us. And this is a part 2. All right. We'll give it a couple of seconds for people to join and kick off right on time. And I'm Audrey. You can see Lisa on the screen there. I will be monitoring your questions and thoughts down in the chat in the lower right. And you will receive a link or an email if you're watching this live with a link to the recording and PDU and SEU information. You can receive one PMI PDU and one Scrum Alliance SEU for joining us today and actively listening and learning about Jira. So we have Lisa facilitating today. Hi, Lisa.
Hey.
Lisa Mabli has served as an Agile mentor, coach, and confidant at all organizational levels and in a variety of contexts, including e-com, hospitality, event management, fintech, and internal facing applications. Lisa, I know you love for people to connect with you on LinkedIn. That's right.
I do.
Yep. Or if you have any questions for me and the team or for Lisa, feel free to send those at any time to info@lithespeed.com. One other thing to note, if you enjoy Lisa's presentation, you can have free virtual Agile coaching with her and sometimes other members of the LitheSpeed team. That's at lithespeed.com/coaching-circle, and we'll follow up with a link to that. So that's some free virtual coaching to ask any questions. Okay, I see lots of folks have joined. So Lisa, let's kick it off.
All right, we'll do. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for spending some time with us today. As Audrey mentioned, this is part 2 to a Jira reports and dashboards webinar that I did, probably a couple of months ago. Hopefully there are some people who are in that one. We made promises that this one was coming, and it's finally here. So we will send out a link to that one later. So I'm just gonna, without further ado, get started on our webinar here. So the first thing I want to mention is that, and this is just a total aside, but I wanted to say something about LitheSpeed. I love working for LitheSpeed. It's the right, perfect group of people, highly supportive, totally engaged. We help each other improve on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is probably why we are recognized for the work that we do. I love working for LitheSpeed. Our clients love working with LitheSpeed. And I know that sounds like a shameless plug, but it's really, really, really true. So I am so happy that you guys are all here learning with and sharing your time with us, because we really enjoy talking with people and socializing how all of this stuff works and helping people work in a way that makes their lives better. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Part and parcel of that is that we strongly encourage questions. We love a dialogue. We love interaction and feedback. So if you have any feedback for us on this webinar, or if you have any feedback on anything else, or if you have any questions, you don't have to isolate those just to the time frame for this webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us either via the web or connect, as Audrey said, connect with me directly on LinkedIn if you have additional questions. I'm so happy to answer those for you. So about me, this is a brief summary. You just heard a little bit about me, but I kind of grew up in the Agile environment using Jira. So I happen to love Jira, and I found some ways to ensure that our tooling has always supported our teams. And the reason for doing this webinar and talking about this topic is that I think a lot of people don't necessarily see all the things that Jira can bring to the table for them to help support their teams in their Agile journey. So I love this topic because I am a self-proclaimed Jira nerd. I'm not ashamed to admit it. And also, two other important things to recognize about me is that I love pancakes and I love dogs. So anything having to do with those two things will give you direct access to my heart. So without further ado, I am going to, Audrey has a quick poll queued up, and we're going to get a sense of who's in the audience and what your role is. So Audrey, I don't know if there's special instructions for that you need to give.
Yes, the instructions are get out your clicker. And so is your role something like a Scrum Master, development team member, product owner, manager, or other? And if it's other, feel free to pop into the chat box how you identify yourself. Okay, we have almost 50% Scrum Masters in the room today.
All right, welcome Scrum Masters.
And I will close the poll. Let's take a look. Okay, so we've got 48% Scrum Master, 25% Manager, next POs, and lastly Dev Team and Other. And then let's just check anyone. And no write-ins. So this covers everybody, Lisa.
Perfect. My kind of crowd. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. What we're gonna do is first quickly review the part one. So I'm gonna do, if you were in part one, that'll all be very familiar. If you were not in part one, it's just gonna be a high level overview of what we talked about then. And we will actually allow 5 minutes for questions at the end of that section, because you may not have seen that before, and you may have some very specific questions that we can answer. So Audrey will be our timer at that point, but we'll just review those real quickly, get a few questions. And then the really exciting thing for me, I love this, I love how this all works. So the really exciting thing for me today is that I get to share with you guys a case study that speaks directly to how Jira can help you and your teams get better at what you're doing. So that is, for me, that is just, that's where it's all at. That gives me so much joy to see these results and see it is directly tied to a best use case of Jira. And then finally, with whatever time we have left, I don't expect this to be a very long webinar, but finally, we're going to have a discussion. You feel free to ask me any questions about what we covered here. Again, provide feedback, or if you have your own specific context where maybe we need to do a little massaging to make the stuff work for you, feel free to ask those questions as well, and we can give you some direct feedback about how you might be able to tweak this a little bit to serve your needs better. So, the thing when you're talking about reports is always to ask yourself, first off, what kinds of questions am I trying to get answers to? So there are lots of kinds of questions that Jira reports can answer. It might be about productivity, it might be scheduling, like when are we doing a release, predictability, planning, scope, quality, flow, where are our bottlenecks, how many defects are we generating with each push of the code. So these are all kinds of things that you need to understand first before you start trying to find which report you want to use, because the report you choose is going to be directly related to the kinds of question you're trying to answer. So not every team is going to have the same needs. They're not going to have the same questions. They're not going to be facing the same challenges. So you may have some reports that are sort of more global, but you may have very specific reports that you have to run for your different teams, because maybe they're faced with different challenges and they're going to need different data to help them make good decisions, different kinds of transparency, different kinds of inspection, different kinds of things they're going to do to adapt based on that data. And your reports are going to be driven by where their challenges are. In other words, what problem you're trying to solve. Getting to Jira reports is extremely easy. The one thing I have highlighted on the slide is the boards menu, because your Jira reports are going to be driven by the filter that is driving the board you are on when you access the report. So if you have multiple teams that are on multiple boards, if you're looking at their sprint board and you go to the reports, it's going to report on the exact same things that are showing up on your sprint board. So sometimes you can get in there and you can be looking at a report and go, this doesn't look quite right. Go back up and check and make sure that you are on a board that is not filtering out data that you expected to see or adding data that you didn't expect to see. So always check what board you're on before you start running reports, and just make sure, because it will share the data with the board that you're on. If you don't know, just taking one step back even further, your boards in Jira are driven by filters. So that's kind of where I'm getting at with that. The way to access reports is very easy. There's an icon on the left-hand side of the of your page generally. So if you click on that, you'll be brought to a page that has maybe a couple of dozen different kinds of reports that you can use to drill down into the data for your teams. I have three that I use all the time. A sprint report, which kind of shows you a burn down, and it also shows you some of the dynamics that are happening in your backlog during the sprint. So things that are added, things that are, what status things are in, what priority things are in. There's also the velocity chart, which is fantastic for planning. It also helps drive predictability, and we'll get more into more detail about that here in a little bit. And then there's the version report, which will give you kind of a projected release date with a cone of uncertainty around it. We're not actually going to talk about that report specifically today, but I do go into great depth on that report in webinar number 1. So if you have questions about that one, that is explained all in webinar number 1. Moving, again, this is just a high-level overview of what these reports do. This sprint report is awesome. I love looking at it on a day-to-day basis because it shows you what's been done, what hasn't been done. It shows you the priority of the items that are in your sprint and then whether they've been done or not done. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can look and see whether you're working on things in priority order. So if you have a bunch of high priority stuff that's in that list under the not completed stuff, and a bunch of low priority stuff that's been completed, that's a great conversation to have and stand up and with your PO about prioritizing stuff. The other thing that you can look at through the burn down is, and I don't know how many of you use burn downs, hopefully a lot of you, you can see where you are in the sprint. The gray line gives you sort of the ideal happy path if you just burn down everything beautifully and continuously. It serves as a fantastic guideline for daily conversations in daily stand-up about where are we in the sprint, where are we on our work, and what do we need to do to microplan for today in order to get done what we said we would do. Next, we have the velocity chart. Love this guy. It's fantastic for planning. It's kind of the standard concept of using yesterday's weather to plan ahead. This gives you view not only into what your velocity has typically been in terms of story points over the past few sprints, it also lets you know how good you are at planning. Do you have a lot of work that comes into the sprint? Are your items typically larger than you think? Do you wind up getting lots of interruptions? The way it does that is on the left is the gray bar, which is what the number of story points that you committed to. So then when you started your sprint and you hit go, there's your sprint backlog, which is story pointed. That's the gray bar. If you add additional stuff during the sprint, it doesn't make that gray bar grow. The green bar is what you actually completed. So at the end of the sprint, it looks and says you've completed this many story points. So again, it doesn't care whether those were added things or original things to the sprint. It's just going to show you how many you completed. So gray bar, what you planned, irrespective of what you added. Green bar is what you completed. The other fantastic thing about this is it gives you a great little metric, which is a metric that if you only have one, and you shouldn't have more than 3, but if you were to only pick one, it should be this metric, which is your predictability. It is a fantastic place to start, especially if you're doing more transformational work, like you're really trying to get on the Agile bandwagon and you're struggling to figure out some of your process things and how you're doing with delivering stuff. You can look at this and say, oh, you know what, I'm sure this never happened to anybody, but we keep planning on 85 story points and we can never finish more than 40. Stop planning for 85 story points, maybe just start with 40 and see how that goes. And the idea there is that you get a very good sense of what can we deliver in a certain time frame, and that's super important for the business. And if you keep missing that mark, it drives these questions of, well, we can never deliver more than 40% of what we say we're going to deliver. Is that a process problem? Is it a requirements problem? Is it a problem definition problem? And it just helps you identify all the ways that could go a little sideways all the way upstream. So Jira dashboards, we also covered this in the other webinar very quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Super easy to find. There's a menu item up in the upper left-hand corner. You click that, you hit the button that says create new dashboard. Got to hand it to Atlassian. They make this very simple for you. You name your thing, you share it with people, and then once you get to that dashboard, there's all kinds of gadgets that you can use to display data that is very helpful for your team. Some of it is more customizable. In other words, you can write a filter and it will only display those kinds of data. The other ones just are sort of out of the box, really standard, kind of trusted, agile ways of looking at things. This is an example of a dashboard. It has pie charts. It has a list of things that were added to the sprint. That one I actually created using a slightly more complex JQuery query. It has a burn down for the current sprint. One of the ones I love is the sprint health gadget because it shows you, again, where are we in the sprint, what status are things in, and what do we have to do to make sure we meet our commitment. So before we go on to the case study, we're going to open it up to questions for about 5 minutes. So Audrey?
So no questions, just a big hello from your friends at somewhere. I won't name names, but you got a big hello out there.
Hey everybody, I have a sneaking suspicion of who that might be.
Guys,
I can't
have any questions, let's pop them into the chat down there. Oh, here's one rolling in. Okay, can you cover QA, Lisa?
Oh, how do you mean? Can I cover QA? Yes. What specifically do you want me to cover in 5 minutes? That's a different question.
We've got a couple. So this, we may get more into this, but related reports. I did just put a link to the part 1 that Lisa has referenced in the chat, so you can click over and bookmark that if you haven't yet seen it.
Don't watch it now.
Yeah, don't watch them simultaneously. It'll get really confusing. You've got a couple of hellos, and I think we can keep going.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of, for those of you who have ever driven in icy weather, you know that when things start to go, you start sliding, the most counterintuitive thing that you can do is actually steer into the skid to regain control. And so I love using that analogy with this case study because we were sliding off the road, definitely. And we kind of had to steer into that and stop ignoring that that's what was happening and just own it and go with it. And that is exactly how we course corrected. So we're going to start with that one. So here's a context for this. It was a large, pretty much waterfall financial company doing a CMS upgrade. When this project was kicked off as an Agile project, there were no testing environments. So they were actually still part and parcel of the waterfall piece of the company that sort of just had this on their, down the line on their project plan and may or may not get done in time, but in a typical waterfall fashion, of course, was taking a very long time to get built. We also spun up the Scrum team and solidified that membership in about mid-December. We had 3-week sprints. There was talk about going to 4-week sprints to accommodate the size of the work that was being done. And then we moved to 2-week sprints. And finally, it was kind of an interesting mix of waterfall mindset, but then some Scrum ceremonies were in play. So there was like this kind of, I would say 75% doing Scrum correctly, and then, but a large 25% of, well, we'll just do all the dev work and then we'll do all the QA part and count that as a different story. Those kinds of things that are very subtle, but also we're kind of contributing to this, to the reasons that we had to kind of take a step back, inspect ourselves and see what was going on. This is the team's velocity chart. If you were in part 1, you know that this is something that makes me itch a little bit because you have no idea what this team is capable of producing over the course of a sprint. You have no idea whether they're going to hit what they say they're going to hit, whether they're not going to hit what they say they're going to hit, whether what they deliver is actually the story points of the things that they started the sprint with, or, hey, I delivered 20 story points. None of those 20 story points were actually on stories that we planned at the beginning of the sprint. No idea what velocity is, no idea, basically zero predictability. This kind of historical velocity chart, and if you're not familiar with these, this is for the past several sprints. At the end of sprint 5, we're looking back at this chart going, we have no idea what this team is capable of doing. Even with a QA environment in place, we would have no idea because it's all over the place. In addition to that, these are their burn down charts. Now, if you're not used to using burn down charts, I just want to emphasize that the legend for these guys is in the upper right-hand corner, because from a UX perspective, no one should ever be up there. So you can see that there's data that is obscured by the legend, and that's because a burned down chart is supposed to go down, not up. So this was a big red flag. So we looked at these, we looked at our velocity chart, and we said, you know what, guys, something is wrong. So obviously, what do? We retrospected on it. Why aren't our burn downs like burning down instead of going up? So we talked about a few things. Obviously, the fact that there's no QA testing environment was a little difficult. It was a huge challenge, I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna be nice, it wasn't a little difficult, it was a huge challenge. Now we have this queue, this WIP queue piling up for QA. So they have tons and tons and tons of stuff that need to be tested, and dev is just continuing to add stuff to that. If you've ever played the airplane game, or you know anything about flow, the bigger your queue is, the slower you're gonna get. There were questions about the how good our estimates actually were. There was a lot of unplanned work happening, so stuff that we didn't even realize was going to happen. Even if we planned the story, they tended to kind of like bring lots of unknown stuff with them. And then as soon as we started coding it, it was like, oh my God, this is 3 times more work than we anticipated. We kind of went into a couple of sprint planning, forgetting that there might have been holidays or vacation, things like that. And then finally, we had this issue of people, whether it was devs or the PO, just bringing stuff into the sprint, or doing a lot of dark work. In other words, stuff that didn't have a Jira issue tied to it, just kind of work that was going on, or just bringing in stuff from the backlog just because they were done with their part on a story that was in the sprint. So it's, well, I finished the dev part, so I'm going to go grab something off the backlog, and then which is not terrible. It is a little terrible, not totally terrible, but it's pretty terrible. But what made it worse was that nobody knew that that was happening. So it was kind of this, oh, okay, these things all together probably are contributing to the fact that we have no idea what we're capable of finishing, contributing to the fact that the amount of work that we have left to do at the end of every sprint was larger than the amount of work that we started with. So we talked through it, and there were a couple of things that we decided to try. The first one was, and I won't go too deeply into this because this is a webinar about dashboards and reporting, but I will say that stop contributing to your WIP queue if you've got one. So we decided to do exactly that. Stop doing work that would require growing that WIP queue for QA. Only start stuff that could be finished within sprint. In other words, stop starting, start finishing. Discuss every sprint backlog change with the whole team when it's happening. So yes, sometimes we do need to bring stuff into the sprint. Totally fine. Be sure everybody's in the room when you do that and have buy-in on, yeah, okay, we're comfortable bringing that thing into the sprint. And then review your backlog changes at least daily in stand-up. So one of the things on the dashboard, which I'll show you here in a second, was what came into the sprint, when did it come into the sprint, what was its priority, and who created the thing and who brought the thing into the sprint. So very useful information. It holds people accountable for why did you specifically bring that specific thing into our sprint. The other thing was do some, just kind of clean up sprint planning a little bit, review our estimates, but then finally the big kicker, and the reason we're having this webinar today, is that we decided to create a dashboard to look at these things, and as a team review it daily, every day without exception, and talk about scope changes, the flow of work, how things were going. So are you guys excited about seeing results? Maybe. This is our dashboard. Not a coincidence that this is the exact same dashboard you saw a few slides ago. This was actually the dashboard that we used. Here we go. First sprint out of the gate. This made my little Agile coaching heart sing. So we kind of We started along the path at the beginning. You can see that slightly upward trend in the beginning. So it got a little scary there, but we brought it in, we brought it together, and we talked through these things. And did we finish everything in the sprint? Nope. Doesn't matter. Baby steps. We were so happy that this happened, but we actually committed to what we felt comfortable with and completed almost all of it because we held each other accountable, and we held each other accountable by looking at data every single day about where we were. And we stopped bringing in stuff to the sprint, and we focused our attention, and we didn't context switch, and we finished things before we started new things. And you can see the results here were just magic. So in case you think that's a fluke, we kept the trend going. Next sprint, okay, what are we going to do slightly better than we did in sprint 6 to make things better? And what are we going to use? We're going to look at our burn down chart. We're going to look at our dashboard every day, and we are going to manage this on a day-to-day or even twice daily basis if we have to, because the environment was just kind of so bizarre, and in that there was no testing environments. We had a lot of people coming in and out sometimes from the teams. We had a lot of requests from the business. I mean, all the stuff that everybody, probably 90% of the people on the call have experienced. But we just managed it as a team on a day-to-day basis. And the key here is that we kept everything visible. It all got oxygen all day, every day. Leadership could go in and see these things if they wanted to. The Scrum team was very focused on making sure that they were working together to deliver what they said they would deliver. Okay, so is it a trend? Is it dumb luck that we did it 2 sprints in a row afterwards, and that just visualizing this data and talking to the data and using these reports and dashboards? Well, 4 and 5, those are the last 2 sprints prior to doing this. 6 and 7, you can kind of see a change in trend. Well, it turns out that that was actually an emerging pattern. So after I left there, I got the data on the subsequent sprints. This team, I mean, they rallied, they steered into the skid, and they got their stuff going in the right direction. So through this continued conversation, this continued data-driven decisions based on visualizing this data out of Jira, they were able to manage all of the risk and all of the chaos and all of the weirdness that was happening in their environment, including all of the upstream waterfall and downstream waterfall stuff, just by using the out-of-the-box Jira reports and dashboards. So the other thing, velocity chart, super exciting. For me at least. Like I said, I'm a Jira nerd, kind of a data nerd. This guy, if you remember what it looked like before, was all over the place. If I were a stakeholder and this team told me they were going to deliver something in 2 weeks, I would be like, yeah, maybe, whatever. I have no idea whether that's true or not, because I can't tell from your historical patterns. Here, you can see sprint 5 is the second one in, kind of a little sketchy. Look at what happens between sprint 6 and sprint 10. It is so exciting. The reason they actually are delivering slightly more than what they started the sprint with is because we also decided to start building in a little wiggle room. We were never 100% utilized after that point. So if we knew we could complete 40 story points, we planned for 30, and we left some wiggle room. Another big piece of sort of flow theory and queuing theory is that you have to leave some room for utilization. So 2 beautiful things about this chart. Number 1, we became extremely predictable. This little metric of delivered versus planned in the bottom right-hand corner is just an Excel spreadsheet that I put together, because unfortunately that's not out of the box with Jira, but I use the data that does come out of the box with Jira. And you can see not only are they getting more and more predictable, like now if I'm a stakeholder and they say, you know what, we can deliver this sprint, I'll be like, yeah, you probably will. They are also increasing their velocity. And I want to remind you that somewhere in here, they went from 3-week sprints to 2-week sprints. So that is an incredible change. So we're seeing greater predictability, greater growth in velocity, simply from talking about their data every day. So you can tell I'm super excited about that. So the summary, use these sprint reports. Use that little ratio to understand what your predictability is. That is probably the key. That is the first thing you should be looking at, and you should be targeting 100% on that every single sprint. And then create and also obviously look at your dashboards. Finally, I just want to share this. This is like the brilliant hallelujah thing. I just got some information recently last week that the original project is scope and is going to be finished 6 weeks ahead of what they originally anticipated. So this is a fabulous, wonderful, again, super duper, I cannot emphasize this enough, incredibly hard work by this team to ensure that they were managing all of the risk and all of their work in a way that they could finish this. This is not easy to do, but the reports and dashboards were a critical piece of understanding the dynamics of what was happening so they knew what to manage. You cannot manage what you cannot see. And they made it visible so that they could manage it, and they worked super hard to manage it. That was the super hard part, and they're coming out 6 weeks ahead of schedule. So that's the case study. That is the end of this webinar. Now it is time to open it up to questions. I'll let Audrey take it from here.
All right, and if you can't stick around for questions, feel free to send in your questions to info@LitheSpeed or connect with Lisa on LinkedIn. And you will receive, if you're attending live, a link to watch this again in the future to your email address. Okay, so we've got some questions here.
This is great watching, by the way. Like if you can't find anything on Netflix and you want to watch a real short series, just this Jira reports, just definitely where it's at.
Oh yeah, binge watch all of them. Yeah. So Lisa, we've got number one, the reports and metrics are only as good as the data behind it. Yes. Who should take primary responsibility for making sure the stories, points, and progress are updated in a timely fashion?
Oh, that's easy. You all should. The quality of this data, this work, the data that represents that work, the visibility of that work is owned by the team. So it is not a person who is responsible for it. It is the Scrum team's responsibility to make sure that cards are being moved, estimates are on there, that Jira is updated and represents reality. That is the entire team's responsibility.
All right. And can you give an example of how you walk over the dashboard during stand-up?
Oh, yeah, sure. Let me scroll back to the dashboard real quick. All right. So the first thing that we look at in daily stand-up, we're not going to completely sacrifice the usual parts of daily stand-up, which is doing the micro planning, right? So the first thing to look at is, where are we in the sprint relative to the work that is lined up for us in the sprint? The column on the left is simply two different representations of the same kind of dynamic. So the nice thing about the sprint gadget that is the sprint progress gadget, I think it's called the sprint health gadget, that's up here in the upper left-hand corner, is that it shows you, well, what's to do and what's in progress, because that burn down only goes down when a thing is flipped to a done status category. So basically your right hand, well, I guess for you guys it's over here, your right handmost column on your sprint board. So looking at that and understanding, maybe we haven't got everything flipped in the done category, but everything that's in progress is very close to being flipped. So it's additional, it's a drill down into the dynamics that are happening in the burn down chart to the left. On the right, you can see that we have things, which is even a further drill down into what status in Jira these things are in. So it's more information about like, okay, do we have tons of stuff in QA? Do we have tons of stuff that's in dev? What's happening? So we know where to focus our efforts. Again, you want to stop starting and start finishing. So this pie chart is a great view into, do we need to get a couple of devs to start testing so that we can close out some of those things before they starting a new ticket that's coming up in the queue. The final one on the bottom right hand is the one that I was mentioning before, which shows the thing that was added to the sprint, who added it, who created it, and what status it's currently in, and when it was put into the sprint. And so that's a conversation that you can have as well, like, oh, wait a minute, since yesterday, 4 things have been added to the sprint. Like, guys, what do we need to do? What's happening? Is this something we can manage? So that's how we would talk through this dashboard. So regular stand-up speaking to the dynamics of this dashboard. Again, getting out of the status update type stand up where you go around the room and give a status update. It was all, the conversation was directed to what's going on, how are we going to plan our day around what we're seeing.
All right, and in this case study, how is it that the story points vary significantly sprint to sprint, but predictability increased?
Yeah. Sorry, let me just find this. So if I'm hearing your question correctly, how did their velocity increase while they stayed as predictable as they were? I think that's what I'm hearing. I'm going to answer that question, and if I'm wrong, just type it into the chat, and we'll revise when I'm done with my answer. The question I'm answering here, and I hope it's your question too, is how is that predictability? How are we still staying at 100% while actually increasing our velocity? And I'm not sure exactly what angle you're getting at there, but for me, what the part I'm answering is the team understanding what they were capable of doing and understanding if they had room to improve, and then also making small adjustments and tiny improvements, sprint over sprint over sprint, clearing things out of the way that may have been slowing them down more than they expected. So this was, great Scrum Masters helping with process improvement, fantastic retros with action items coming out of them to just clear the path on some things that might have been slowing them down, and then pushing themselves a little bit, right? Like, you don't want to go crazy and like, well, we did 30 this sprint, we want to do 50 next sprint, but let's plan for 30 this sprint. Well, maybe we want to do 32, and just push it just a hair, whatever the team is comfortable doing. And you will see those, as long as you've got the process improvements happening in parallel, you will see the velocity increase, and the team will get better and better in understanding of what they're capable of and what their stretch goal should be. And that comes all through conversation and feedback with one another. That's how you get these kinds of velocity charts.
Awesome. And we've got a couple of questions about the delivered planned ratio here. You had said that you created that in Excel. Can you just talk a little bit more about what the data was, where it come from, or how you made that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so on the screen that I have up, you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, it has the sprints listed and then the committed and completed. That actually is, if you take out the little teal-colored Excel thing that I stuck in there, the bar graph and the data down below, that actually does come straight out of Jira. So that's what a sprint report or a velocity chart looks like in Jira. What I do is then you can copy and paste that into an Excel spreadsheet, and then you just write a little formula to divide one by another.
All right. And I think for people just getting started with Jira, we're wondering, for data to show up on these reports, what are some of the fields or areas people need to enter in the epics and stories so Jira can report on it?
So for the sprint report and the velocity chart, what's in your epic is not going to matter. So you don't want to put your epics in sprints because they will mess up this data. So what you want to do is, all you have to do is, number one, make sure that all the work that's being done in the sprint is represented by a Jira issue. Number two, make sure that your Jira issue has story points on it. And number three, move your stuff across the board as it needs to be moved, as it changes status. Everything else Jira does for you. One thing I will say, Jira, on the velocity chart, it's story points. On the burn down charts here, that can actually go either by count, by hours, or by story points. So if you're really just starting out and you maybe don't have story points on everything, you can also do burn downs based on issue count. So literally, as a thing is closed, it burns down the chart. The velocity chart doesn't give you that flexibility. So if you have to put hours estimates on your Jira tickets just for some whatever reason you have for doing that, then it can actually be configured to burn down by hours. So you've got hours count and story point on these guys, and then you have story points on this guy. But yes, data quality. You have to have the data in there, and you have to move stuff.
All right, we have an organization here looking to track what was originally committed to for a sprint and what was completed of the original commitment. So this person has been manually taking the sprint report and excluding items after the sprint. Is there a better way? We're on cloud.
I'm not sure what you mean by excluding items after the sprint, but the way this report and all Jira reporting is designed is under the assumption that you are using best practices for Scrum. So the idea is you, when you go into sprint planning, have your sprint backlog lined up and estimated in priority order. You click go on the sprint. That assigns the sprint to all of those tickets. Then at the end of the sprint, you close the sprint and it looks at what's in the done status and what's not in the done status. So that is naturally done by Jira. So stuff that was added, there are a couple things that are not included in here because they're not best practices. One of them is adding stuff to the sprint that was already closed prior. So should you be working on something that you forgot to stick in the sprint and then you're like, oh my God, I finished that thing, but I want to put it in the sprint. Be sure you put it in the sprint and then close it. Otherwise, it flags it as a thing that was done outside the sprint and it won't count it towards your velocity. Also, if there's stuff being done outside the sprint, I would ask you why. And I would ask you why it's not part of your sprint because it is work being done by that team.
All right. And if anyone else has a question, now's the time to stick it in because we've got one more here. We'll give it a couple more minutes. So Lisa, if my burn down chart is very end of sprint loaded for completion, so we only get feedback late in the sprint when it's harder to maneuver, is this a smell of something wrong?
Yes. I don't know if I have to go into too much explanation about that. Unfortunately, in my previous deck, I did show some burn down charts, which were pretty horizontal, and then at the end, there's a huge drop. That is a red flag on so many levels. If there's anybody in QA on the phone, you know exactly what that means. That means that nobody is handing stuff over to QA until the very last day of the sprint, and they're probably handing over a huge batch of stuff. So batches are bad. Just remember that. If you remember nothing else from today, batches are bad. What qualifies as a batch? A bunch of stuff being handed over through the status or through the flow at one time, or large stories also is considered a batch. So that is usually the dynamic there, and that is bad for lots and lots and lots of reasons. No disagreement from me on that one. Definitely a bad smell.
Any more questions? Oh, we've got one more. Let me just check it out.
Yay, I love questions.
Oh, we have ideas for other sessions. All right, I'll send those over to Lisa. And Lisa, we did get a big hello from the Scrum Samurais. So thanks for joining, you guys.
I'll be seeing you guys soon.
All right, and if anyone has another question, feel free to send to info@LitheSpeed.com. You'll receive a link to the recording of this webinar in just a little bit if you attended live, and if not, the recording will be on LitheSpeed.com. Have a great day. If you'd like to join Lisa for some virtual coaching for free, you can check it out on our website, or you'll get a link to this. It's LitheSpeed.com/coaching-circle.
One other thing, if you connect with me on LinkedIn and it asks you for an email address, you can use lisa.mabli@lithespeed.com.
All right, awesome. Well, everybody have a wonderful day, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon in some capacity. All right, thank you, Lisa. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.